Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Preface webinar series, A Color Story. We'll just take a brief moment for our panel of speakers to do an introduction. I'm Victoria Nelson Harris, Senior Textile Specialist at Mimaki USA. I'm now going to pass the mic to Betsy Frangiola to share a little bit more information about Preface.
Hi and welcome. My name is Betsy Frangiola, and I am the founder of Preface and the owner of Betsy Frangiola Fabric Studio. Preface is a fabric trend show that was launched in 2018. As the name suggests, it is about the beginning, where our goal is to provide a wide variety of inspiration and all the tools needed to begin one's own design story and to create a seasonal collection, including fabrics, visual trends, color, vintage garments, original print designs, craft workshops, and helpful information from industry leaders like today's webinar. This is our 6th Preface event and our 2nd in the age of COVID. Let's see, a 2nd in the age of COVID. So we have adapted from an in-person event to creating a show in a box. We call them our experience kits. Sorry, everybody's going crazy here. And okay, I'm not sure what the sound is going on. We call them our experience kits, and they include fabric swatches from participating mills, our exclusive trend and color guides, and an invitation to this webinar series. Today, we're here to tell a color story where we hope to take you on the journey of color from forecasting and creative concept featuring Anna Starmer of Luminary Colors, through to production palettes and the best ways to communicate using correct color terminology with Denise Silva, and finally dyeing and printing execution with the help of Ken Butts of Data Color and Victoria Harris here at Mimaki USA. I mentioned these industry leaders, and while they are not directly partners in Preface, I'm so excited to connect them with you today to share their expertise in all things color. So thank you for participating.
I'd like to just give our other panel speakers an opportunity to do a brief introduction. So we have Anna Starmer from Luminary Color. Welcome, Anna.
Director of Luminary, and I'm coming from the UK this evening, where it's the evening here.
Next, we have Denise Silva, Product Development and Innovation Leader. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, I'm Denise Silva. I'm a 25-year veteran, industry veteran for apparel brands such as Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie & Fitch, and most recently Justice. I have been working in the textile and color sphere for pretty much all of my career. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us today. And then lastly, we have Ken Butts from Data Color. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Victoria. Again, my name is Ken Butts. I'm the Global Key Account Team Manager here at Data Color. I've been with Data Color for 28 years. If you're not familiar with Data Color, we manufacture spectrophotometers and software for color measurement and color management. Some of the world's largest retail apparel companies use our solutions throughout their supply chain. So thanks again for having me.
So without further ado, let's begin. If anybody has any questions throughout the presentation, please just post them in the chat window, and then we'll address them at the end of the presentation for a live Q&A and discussion. So just a brief overview of what the presentation is going to entail. We'll start off with the color forecasting process and key benefits. Then we'll get into the language of color and how to communicate color across the supply chain, how brands develop color in a production workflow, some of the tools and best workflows for keeping quality and color consistency, and then a digital printing advantage for the textile supply chain, and then some nice features to develop color and some new technologies for inkjet printing. And then we'll come to a closing with some additional resources for everyone. So I'd like to welcome Anna Starmer to begin to share a little bit more information about color forecasting and some of the key benefits. Welcome, Anna.
for over 25 years. I have worked inside the industry, developing new colour ideas and future trend stories for brands as diverse as Marks and Spencer to Manolo Blahnik, and I have been producing the Luminary Forecasting Bibles for now 15 years. We're in our 24th edition. And Luminary is sold through my partners in the States, ESP Trend Lab, and we sell into major brands and retailers like Victoria's Secret, J. Crew, Anthropology, Gap. We sell with and work with big brands all over the world. The point of Luminary is to bring inspiration to the design teams and also key colours and technical colour information to designers and buyers. It's a 2-year ahead forecast. This is an image of one of the Luminary books from last season. I developed the books myself, and I'm very, very passionate about creating accurate colour within my books, alongside the original photography that I create, as well as the storytelling and the writing. So I have fabric swatches, which I create together with a dye house in the UK, which are dipped on cotton poplin. We have been developing these swatches now together for over 15 years. And I've got over 1,000 colours in the Luminary swatch library, which brands can order from, just like a Pantone swatch. I then develop the colours onto the paper chips as well. These are some of the brands that we work with. For each season, we get a variety of different brands purchasing the Luminary book, and then I also do ongoing consultancy and colour design work with some of these brands. So I just did a recent project with a kitchen interiors brand called Dualit, and I worked on the colour process right the way through from the beginning through to the end. So this is some of the concept ideas that we had for the Dualit project. And if we skip through to the next slide, what I usually do is I start off with what I call my treasure. So I collect and gather items. I've got, as you can probably see behind me, boxes and boxes of treasure that my children actually call junk, but really it is treasure, honestly. But when I go and start a new process with a brand, often I'll take some of these boxes of treasure with me to inspire the colours. But also with a brand like Dualit, it was really important to see how the colour looks on different surfaces and materials. And for me, that's an important way of how we communicate colour. And of course, then when we get down into producing colour and communication of colour, the surfaces that we produce the colour on becomes a vital part of the whole process. So at the beginning of the season, I always start off with lots of treasure, fabrics, pieces of yarn, anything that I find that inspires me for colour. And I will develop these and put together my recipe pack or my ingredients, which I'll send off to the dye house. I also work with fabric manufacturers and yarn manufacturers around the world. This is a project that I did recently with a cashmere supply from China, and we work together in a completely exclusive way, and I ship colours over to them and they ship beautiful little swatches of cashmere back to me, and I sense check all of the lab dips for them, and we develop the colours for their cashmere colour cards, and then I produce the photography as well to sit alongside the fabrics and the swatches of knitted cashmere in the colours. In the studio, I use my photography to tell the story of colour, and I gather some of my treasures or put together still lives to talk about colour in that way. I've written a few books about colour and how to use colour combinations, especially for home interiors. This was released in 2019, Love Colour, and is available at all good bookstores. It is a book which really focuses on colour combinations and how to put colour together, but it's also about teaching ourselves how to love colour again and not be overwhelmed by the choice of colour that's available to us out there in the world today. How to remember the colours that we love ourselves. This is a really important part of being a home designer and a designer. So I have used this quite often in recent months, but I truly believe that there has never been a more important time to be a designer. Going forward, it is design, creativity and innovation which is going to help to move us beyond pandemic and beyond the devastation of the global emergency. I talk a lot about how people are living in my books. I photograph what's going on in the world. This is actually my son on the climate change march last year. And I use this information in the way that I talk about colour. Because for me, the brands that I work with, they're producing goods for consumers, for human beings. So if we're going to create colours, we've got to start with human beings as well. What's going on? What's influencing humans? What do humans want right now? And of course, we need quite a lot. There's quite a lot going on right now. The last 12 months have transformed, fundamentally shifted the way that we all live. In Britain, we're still in a lockdown currently. And, you know, these things will have and already are having a fundamental effect on the decisions that we need to make as designers, as brands, as manufacturers. And I have this slide in a presentation that I put together last year, which I think is very poignant right now. What we buy, wear, make, eat and drive, it represents your fundamental connection to the earth and to yourself and to the future. And what it's saying here is that consumers, as human beings, as designers, we have the power to make change. And we think, oh my God, the problems are all too huge. Oh my God, as a brand, where do I even start with transforming the way that I'm creating right now? But really, we can just start small and work up. And I think that's the absolute crux of it at the moment. At Luminary, we create colours. But we want to really, really develop new ideas around colour going forward. This isn't a new idea for us. We work with brands looking at colour creation, colour direction, and we want to work out how to do colour in a better way. What is the future of colour? Right now, there are no foolproof solutions. I can't tick a box and tell you that I've got all the answers, I'm afraid. But the part of my job that's really important is to start these conversations with my partners and my clients. This is something that all of us need to do. It's how to create colour better, how to create colour with less impact on the earth. And so part of that for me in the last sort of 2 years has been developing all of my colours and my books into digital files. And the digital files not only offer instant access for my clients to the colours that I produce, but they also offer a completely carbon neutral way of using colour and communicating colour. And that's a fascinating thing right now. It's so important. I developed the digital books thinking that they would be great tools in helping us to work from home, but what's happened is that they've also become a really sustainable way of using colour. Obviously, the design industry is destructive, it's toxic, it's wasteful. We've all seen the pictures of the rivers running with next season's toxic colours coming out of the factories in the Far East. And my question to all of my brands is, how do we shift this? What can we do? We all are in charge of this. Together we really can build a better future. And I believe that it starts with trend. It starts with the colour process. It starts at the beginning of how we're planning. It starts with our strategy. We need to build all of our values around colour, around design, from a new set of values. This image was in Luminary in 2016. It's from Iceland. I travel to Iceland with my family. I often used to travel and used travel inspiration within my books. But for me, the fundamental shift that happened this season was that I didn't want to go to a city. I didn't want to go somewhere where there was lots of people. I went to Iceland and I stood on the edge of this crater and I talked in my then presentations afterwards in New York and in London about the wilderness, about nature, and about how unless we as designers reconnect with nature, with the Mother Earth, we're not going to make the right decisions for the future. And so this really has been, you know, part of my process. I bring nature into everything that I do, and I try to connect all the decisions that I make back to the earth, and I try to talk about this continuously in the presentations, the books, and the colour palettes that I put together. We have a responsibility for the future. You know, the things that we base our trends upon today are very different from how we used to produce trend books. Color is messy, it's dirty, it's destructive. From paint colors to fabric dyes, how can we do it better? I'm just going to keep asking this question. And I want to work with people to come up with the solutions. These are some of the images from some books that I put together recently, which are more about interiors and paint colors, developing paint. Obviously, you know, we're talking now about vegan paint, we're talking about non-toxic paints. How do we put these colors forwards, and how do we make our homes and our lives cleaner and kinder as well? As we can't travel, we're bringing the travel to you, and we're showing you here how these colors influence everything that we do at Luminary. So the travel inspiration, the images, the colors become my fabric swatches created here in the UK, my digital colors, and also the yarn swatches that I produce for my books as well. So we work in a regenerative design capacity. We want every brand that we work with to facilitate a deeper listening to the earth. And really the fundamental part of everything that I've been talking about is it's just about this reconnection to nature. There's a big change afoot. We can see this. I travel and speak and research, and I listen to what's going on around me. And part of that is listening to new material makers as well. And there is a desire for new innovation. There's a huge growing awareness for a need for change. And this is getting bigger, and this is positive, and this is hopeful. And if we're going to look to the future, really, all that we can do is pin our dreams and our colours on hope, and hope that we can design a better future and design a better way of working with colour and materials going forwards. And that.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing all of that inspiring information about the color forecasting process and the benefits. So next, I'm going to welcome Denise Silva to discuss with us the language of color and how to communicate color across your supply chain. So welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Victoria. Hello, I'm Denise. I am a industry veteran in raw material, color development, and product integrity. I've worked for brands such as Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie & Fitch, and most recently Justice. And you know, from the brand perspective, we work with companies like Luminary Colors to help us identify our seasonal color palettes for our collection that's right for our customer and right for our brand categories. And, you know, working closely with the color forecasters and our concept teams and our design teams, we're able to hone in on what's appropriate for our products, and then how we translate those into our production facilities and get those to the sales floor. So working really closely with designers to understand how certain colors will react on certain fabrications, you know, whether that's through dye formulations or sample developments to show them exactly what's achievable. It becomes pretty critical for the designers to understand what's technically achievable and what's not. So, you know, it's been sort of a great journey working with these forecasters to narrow down color palettes into technically achievable colors on the production floor. So starting with how color is defined, you know, that's one of the biggest challenges we face, is communicating color not only internally with our brand partners, but externally with our supply chain. And speaking a set language helps to narrow that and make sure that your changes are communicated quickly and efficiently, and they're understood. So here's a perfect example of how, you know, color is a great place to start, and the challenges we face with communicating that. So when looking at this bookbinding of Luminary Colors, you know, how would you describe this yellow? Is it a lemon yellow? Is it a canary yellow? Those are, you know, great terms, but they're not really definitive from a color perspective, from a production perspective. So we really have to hone in on specific language that we're using. And some of the key terms that we use in the industry are hue, chroma, and value. And you know, we have to take out the subjectivity, because each person interprets color highly subjectively. Eye fatigue, age, the environment in which you're viewing colors can influence that perception. So making sure that we're being very succinct in how we're describing color helps to eliminate any variables. So each color has its own distinct appearance based on these three elements: hue, chroma, and value. Chroma or saturation, and value or lightness. So by describing a color using these three attributes, we can accurately identify the color and distinguish it from any other color. And when asked to identify a color, you most likely speak to its hue, which is quite simply it's the color: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, etc. And the color wheel on the left, the hue wheel on the left, shows that continuum of color from one hue to the next. And as the wheel illustrates, you know, if you mix red and yellow, you get orange. If you mix yellow and blue, you get green. It's very simple. It's very basic. As you were a kid, you know, coloring with crayons, if you didn't have a green crayon, you mixed blue and yellow and you got green. It's very similar in dyeing sciences. And as you move to chroma or saturation describes the vividness or the dullness of a color. In other words, you know, how close is this color to either gray or pure hue? For example, look at the tomato on the left and the radish. The red of the tomato is very vivid and bright, while the radish appears much duller. And then, you know, if you kind of look back to that hue wheel on the left again, you see how chroma changes as we move from the center of the wheel toward the perimeter. The colors in the center are much more gray or dull and become more saturated and vivid as we move to the perimeter. So the third value is value, and it's the degree of lightness. And colors can be classified as light or dark when comparing their value. For example, when a tomato and a radish placed side by side, the tomato appears much lighter in contrast to the radish, which is much darker in red value. And the value or lightness characteristic is represented by this vertical axis on the right. So when you look at these three characteristics, you see that color is a three-dimensional object. And the next slide shows you sort of how color is a three-dimensional space. You see that hue, value, and chroma across, you know, through this sphere of color, and making sure that we're speaking in those three characteristics help to really pinpoint where a color sits in comparison to its standard or the original shade we're trying to match to. And we can use, you know, you kind of do this with your eyes, but you can certainly use computer technology to help assist with that. And these two images are two different methods of communicating color that show you sort of that three-dimensional space and where color lies in that color space. So poor color memory, eye fatigue, color blindness, viewing conditions, they all affect the human eye's ability to distinguish color differences. In addition to those limitations, the eye doesn't detect differences in hue, chroma, or lightness equally. In fact, you know, the average person will see hue first, then they'll see chroma, and then they'll see lightness. So, you know, our eyes need three things to see color. We need a light source, we need an object, and we need a person, an observer looking at these things. And, you know, being able to accurately voice what you're seeing and share that with your design team and share that with your production team becomes instrumental in speed and efficiency in achieving the correct colors and you know, not wasting resources. As Anna spoke to, color development is extremely a dirty business. So minimizing the amount of lab dip turns you're doing is hugely critical in reducing carbon footprints. So, you know, if we're using things like color measurement instruments from companies like Datacolor, you can certainly, the instrument perceives the reflective light of the color the same way your eye does. And by using these instruments, they can help you plot where these colors land in color space. And the image on the right shows you a color tolerance plot of a specific magenta hue. So the standard is in the center of your cross axis there in the middle, and every one of those pink dots is a dye lot of color. And you can see there's a quite broad range of acceptable color tolerance there. And you really want to make sure that, you know, by using digital color instruments, you can help to see numerically where these colors fall, and it can help you understand how far apart they'll be from one another visually so that they don't end up sewn together within the same garment. It becomes extremely critical in garments like intimate apparel where you have multiple components, or garments with mixed media where there is a knit hem and a woven top, a woven bodice, for example. You want to make sure those colors match critically. And certainly you can do that with visual assessment, but you can do it a lot more efficiently, with digital color tolerancing. And so, you can, again, the graph on the left will show you sort of all of the green dots are examples of colors that fall within acceptable tolerance. And if you were to look at all those visually, you would see that they sit well together. Whereas the colors identified by the red squares are colors outside of your tolerance. And that really, that's something you might want to reject as a lab dip, or you might want to reject as a production lot to make sure that they don't get sewn together and land in your production. And so, when you're looking at numerical color tolerance or visual color tolerance, the numerics can certainly help to guide you specifically and make things a lot easier for you. It can help you eliminate the number of lab dips that you're doing. It can help you quantify your reasoning for rejecting something or accepting something. It can help you illustrate to a designer or a merchandiser in your organization that, because everybody sees color differently, they may say it's perfectly acceptable visual tolerance, but by looking at numerics that it's certainly not. And you wouldn't want to see those two things sewn together within a garment. So ideally, you want to be able to make sure that you're speaking that consistent language so that not only are you clear on what your expectations are and your next submissions can be more closer to standard and approvable, your production teams understand exactly what you're trying to communicate to them. So most commonly, instruments that are used for digital color tolerancing are spectrophotometers produced by companies like Datacolor, and the use of spectrophotometers is boundless. Color matching decisions are made every day by those comparing a reproduced object to a reference point. And spectrophotometric assisted color measurement can be useful in areas as listed here as establishing specifications and tolerances. You wouldn't, if you set your standard as 0, you might want to approve a lab dip at something that's 0.5 away from your lab dip. If you can help verify raw materials and components meet specifications. As I said, you want to make sure your strap elastic matches your cup fabric, matches your lining fabric. You can use spectrophotometers to determine accurate formulations of colorants. So it can help you identify the specific dye recipe for that specific color on that specific fabric substrate and ensure that you're meeting quality standards by not oversaturating something. You can validate color performance in your production lines to instill confidence in your consumers and your dye houses to make sure that they're consistently producing the same color for you if you're doing multiple dye lots. And it can help you establish that common language across the whole supply chain, which is critical when communicating color. And as Anna mentioned, spectrophotometers can help you eliminate multiple lab dip rounds. You can certainly do initial formulations and predictions digitally on screen before ever seeing a physical submit of a color. And it can help you eliminate those 3, 4, 5 rounds of submissions, which saves significant amount of time and money. A lot of times a designer will tell you a lab dip is free. Well, yes, you're not getting an invoice for that lab dip, but you're ultimately paying for those goods in the cost of goods, whether it's a half a penny per yard somewhere down the line. You're going to pay for the amount of lab dips that you're doing. So it can certainly help you minimize all of your, like I said, your time and your costing. And using tools to supplement your visual assessment, using tools like spectrophotometers nowadays is becoming vastly critical in preserving, carbon footprints. So for that, I'm gonna hand it over back to Victoria to kick it off to Datacolor.
Thank you, Denise, for all that great information. Now I'm gonna welcome Ken Butts from Datacolor to share more information on the workflows and key benefits of using these types of tools to keep color consistency across your supply chain. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, Denise, for all the excellent information on the best way to manage the color development process. It actually is quite challenging, this whole process of transforming inspiration into apparel. So we have the great tools that Anna described for designers to identify the correct standards that they want to see on the final products that end up in the store. either physically or on the web shop. So oftentimes, though, that process has to begin occurring, the process of picking color standards has to occur maybe 6 to 8 months ahead of the time when you expect to see those products in the store. And if you've been involved with the color development process, at least the visual process, you know that it can be very frustrating to send your color standard to a supplier and have them send that sample back as their first initial attempt, and it doesn't match. And you make some comments, hopefully using the right color terminology as Denise has described, and you go through this process 3 or 4 times of trying to reach an approval. This is what we call the lab dipping process, if you're not familiar with that term. Ultimately, that takes a lot of time, and behind each one of those samples is a shipment. So that package had to be shipped, and there's cost involved, and there's the time involved. So ultimately, what we want to see happen is that as a designer selects and validates a color standard for their product, that they can send that request to a supplier digitally without having to ship a physical sample, and then go through that whole process of approval without actually having to have a physical sample shipped to me until I'm finally ready to see the last sample to get an approval. The way I like to think of it is that every sample that you receive and reject should never have been sent in the first place. And that's exactly where this whole digital workflow shows its most significant benefit. And what, as Denise has described, is the way to describe colors with numbers so that we can establish acceptability tolerances. If I can describe 2 colors with a set of numbers, then I can talk about how close they should be before that supplier should send that physical sample to me. And that's really what we're trying to do with digital color workflows, is we're trying to eliminate the shipment of bad samples, and long-term to ensure that the production samples are all in agreement with each other and they actually match the original inspiration. So how are we going to do that? So what I want to go through is show you some of the different technologies that you may encounter. Now, digital color management has been around for 50 years, but it's really only been the last, say, 10 to 15 years that those solutions have been adopted in the retail apparel workflow. So when you go into any retail apparel company, you're likely to find a spectrophotometer somewhere in your organization. If you're not familiar with what a spectrophotometer is or what it looks like, here's a couple of examples. These are 2 different types of instruments, but they are the most common ones used in the retail apparel industry today and in the supply chain. On the left, we have a type of instrument that's used for measuring solid color, so any sort of solid material. The instrument is a very simple process. We have a light that lights the sample, and then we have a lens that measures how much light is reflected from that sample, and then we produce what's called a reflectance curve, basically like a fingerprint. So just like we all have fingerprints, every color has its own unique fingerprint. And once we have that data, then we can calculate all these great color numbering systems like LAB and LCH and even RGB and CMYK that many of you are familiar with. And from that, we can establish color tolerances to improve the quality of the samples that are being submitted. Now, on the right-hand side, we have a different type of technology that's called hyperspectral imaging, because not all samples that we measure are solid. So, for example, a lace or a mesh or a heather or a multicolored print, you can't measure those on traditional spectrophotometers. So for those types of materials, we're going to use hyperspectral imaging like the Datacolor SpectraVision system. So these are benchtop instruments, which means you have to bring the samples to them. But in many situations, that's not very practical. So if, like, for example, you're working in a production environment where you have rolls of fabric that are being printed or coming off of continuous dye range, or maybe let's say you have quality control for very large parts, as you might find in a car, you can't easily bring those samples back to the instrument. So in those cases, we take the instrument to the samples. So these are what we call portable spectrophotometers, and they're designed to be in very good agreement with the benchtop models. So the types of work and types of data that you're generating with the portables is going to agree very well with what you get from the benchtops. What I should have mentioned also is, as a part of this process, is that data is going to be shared digitally. So we produce a special file called a QTX file that you might have heard of that can be sent via email or shared via web applications, so that you can share those color numbers without shipping the physical samples. Now, for the designers, we don't really see designers using spectrophotometers or portable spectrophotometers so much. They have colleagues who do that for them, but there's still an opportunity for designers to benefit from this type of technology. So what you'll see in the market in the last 2 or 3 years are what we call ultra portable color measuring instruments. Now, they're not exactly like spectrophotometers. They're not going to produce exactly the same data, but they're very good as color lookup devices. So in many cases, as a designer, you may have said, I have an inspiration color. Let's say it's a feather or it's a piece of fabric I found somewhere. I can't send that feather or piece of fabric to the 20 dye mills I'm working with. So that's why I have to translate that into a real standard, such as Anna described, that we can then send to the suppliers. Well, that process in many cases is a visual process where you're just flipping through books or going to a wall and looking for a color standard that matches. Well, at the ultra portable color measurement process, you simply measure the color, the inspiration color, and on the mobile app, you can see the closest colors in that color library. And so immediately you know what color standard should I be pulling and looking at, rather than having to go through the time of doing that visually. And also, if you're on a shopping trip and you measure a color, you can send that to your colleagues and they can begin working on the color development process immediately. So that's what we call ultra portable color measurement instrument. Behind the scenes with that, of course, is software. Again, don't want to overwhelm you with this, but we just need to know that what suppliers are doing with this type of technology is trying to meet your expectations as a retail apparel company for lots of different things. One, they want to keep the cost in line with your expectations, depending upon the application of the product or the garment, whether it's athletic apparel or intimate apparel. There are different expectations for light fastness and wash fastness. We have to comply with rules and regulations regarding what chemicals can be used. So that's where the formulation softwares come into the picture. They are there to help the dyers to be as effective and as efficient as possible to ensure they get the best quality dye combination available to meet your expectations. And then in an ongoing process, they use quality control software to ensure that their samples do indeed comply with your expectations. And so that's the type of systems that you're going to find associated with spectrophotometers. Again, I mentioned that color digital workflows have been in place with retail apparel companies really since about 2000, is when we first started seeing retail apparel companies begin investing in technology for color management. I work with a lot of these companies, and they've given me the opportunity to take some photographs of their work environment so that maybe you can get some inspiration. In this particular company, you'll see on the left-hand side, they have a collaborative room they're working in, but what's really nice about this room is that they can change the lights. So in the center, you may be able to see that they have 4 light switches where they can switch the fixtures from daylight to their normal store lighting to incandescent lighting to see exactly how those samples are going to look in the different environments. And this is part of their palette validation process. Before they even begin their request for color matching in the supply chain, they want to validate that palette first. There's always going to be a need for visual sample evaluation. So in these offices, you're going to see light cabinets, and you're going to see luminaire tables. And in some, as in this picture on the left-hand side, you'll see their use of on-screen color for making color decisions. So in this particular workflow, the color standards are sent digitally to the supplier, and the samples are sent back digitally rather than the physical samples, and the colorist actually views those samples on screen and makes their decision. Now, of course, there are some criteria that you have to meet for that to work well. You have to have low lighting in the room, you have to have a calibrated monitor, you have to have a good quality monitor. And so those things are all an important part of the process, but it's a normal part of the process these days. If we move on to the next company slides, you'll see here what's interesting to point out here is that these technicians all are wearing gray lab coats. The reason I mention that is because we're always going to have a visual color evaluation as a part of our process. As much as we see the value of color measurement, generally speaking, most people want to see that last sample. Well, they want to touch it, they want to feel it, they want to be sure it works good with their other samples. And that means you're going to make a visual evaluation, and you need to do that in standardized lighting. You cannot make evaluations in a conference room with the fluorescent lights on or by a window at your desk. That is not standardized lighting, and you will not get good, consistent results. And then you'll also wonder why you say the sample is too red and your dyer says it's too green. That's because of issues with metamerism. So in this particular example, these colorists are wearing gray lab coats. That's an important element of visual color evaluation, because if you are wearing let's say a bright pink jacket for some reason, the light from your light cabinet will reflect from that jacket, and it's going to affect the color of the samples in front of you. So always be sure that you're conscious of the types of clothing you're wearing when you're making visual sample evaluations. So this is another color office. This is at Under Armour. They've given me the freedom to share their name. You'll see that they have a nice setup on the left-hand side. This is their color library where they will have panels around the room for inspiration for the designers. They have the ability to change the lighting to the various lighting that they would encounter in their stores and outside. And then ultimately, though, at the top right, you'll see they do have a spectrophotometer where the designer's color inspiration will be measured, and then they'll do a colorimetric search, not only for their color libraries, but across the thousands of colors that may have died in the past. Because the last thing they want to do is redevelop a color if it's already been done. So the colorimetric search process helps them to very quickly identify any potential shade matches that have already been achieved, so they can minimize a lot of their color development work. So as you again walk around your company, you may stumble across a room where people are busily at work measuring colors on spectrophotometers. And just know that that is an integral part of your process, especially in these days in which we live, where it's so critical to eliminate the shipment of physical samples, and also to validate palettes and only develop those colors that you really have a strong sense are going to be important for the market. So again, thank you very much, Victoria. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ken, for all of that great information. Here, we're going to take a look at the digital printing advantage in color development within the supply chain. So if you see here, these are two models. This is the traditional printing process for textile production versus the digital inkjet method. If you see the traditional method, from design concept to sample strike off to volume production, can take up to 2 months, sometimes longer. If you look at the digital method, this could take about a week and a couple hours. For some of you that may be less familiar, the sample strike off is basically in a textile production, it's a color approval check. So they want to approve this sample to be able to move to the volume production. Really, the key important factor in this comparison is that with the digital method, you can go from the print strike off to volume production within the same day. So you have a really increased speed to market, and you also have saved a lot of resources. It's a much more sustainable and flexible method. Also, with the current pandemic and the pivots and disruptions within the supply chain, e-commerce is becoming ever more important, and it's exponentially growing. So this is also increasing the demand for faster speed to market and small batch production. There's a lot of value doing small batch production from the sample strike-off printer, and then on the same printer doing your volume production. The value comes from not just the color consistency you can achieve, but also because you have quick speed to market, you're able to offer more trend-driven supply. Also, increasing sales can be supported instantly without any commitment to large inventory and stock. As we know, inventory and stock can lead to loss of profit due to costly markdowns. Here, this is a quick snapshot of the sustainable advantage of digital textile printing. Overall, it's not a perfect system, but it's definitely a step in the right direction to lower the resources used, reduce waste, power, water, and CO2. Here, this is showing a direct-to-consumer model with digital textile printing. Like I mentioned a minute ago, there has been a huge pandemic pivot and disruption within the supply chain. So lots of brands and retailers have shifted businesses to e-commerce platforms and direct-to-consumer platforms. So e-commerce, requires this instantaneous, increase in your speed to market. One of the biggest drivers in the market for e-commerce is social media influencers, for example. Social media influencers influence the consumer at the point of purchase. So that is only really achievable for printed textiles with the digital technology. So if you look here, the digital method, you can do this within less than 30 minutes, the process, and then go into shipping, so you have about 3 days. With the traditional method to move with a direct-to-consumer model, this could take up to 2 to 3 months. Here, I'm just going to do an overview of what is achievable with the traditional, with the CMYK digital sample, right? So if we see the solid form in the center on the screen, this is the color space achievable with a basic CMYK ink set, and that's cyan, magenta, yellow, black. So it's a 4-color ink set. If you see on the outside of this dimensional model, you see the little spots. We're going to label these as spot colors. Spot colors, an example of this would be a Pantone color collection. You can also create your own spot colors within your design software such as Illustrator. And really the way a spot color can be identified and its key value is that within your Illustrator, you would load one of these spot colors and fill it into your design. But then when you open this file in the printing RIP software, the RIP software is what communicates with the printer to print. So when you open this file within the software, the RIP software automatically identifies it as a spot color and will assign the appropriate formula and percentage of the different ink that's being used. So it really helps with that consistency of color within your workflow. So if we look at the basic CMYK solid in the center, you'll see that this is achieving about 60% of these spot colors. So there is options being able to expand this color space by doing an extended gamut. So this is where you could incorporate additional ink colors such as light cyan, light magenta, fluorescence, orange, violet, for example. So there are different options here to create which color spaces you're going to design to. Really, the value here is, or the importance of sharing this, is that if you're trying to get into this business, is really to identify what your color goals are and what colors are most important. So Mimaki, as a printer manufacturer, can help you come up with the best solution for you. So there's 2 ways to approach color within the digital printing sphere. There's good color, and then there's accurate color. And both of these are used in the market for color management. So with good color, foremost, the important variable is to keep the color settings consistent throughout your workflow. The other part with good color is doing a visual match. So, as an example, when you start off in your design CAD software, setting your color settings, for example, in Photoshop, you would set to Adobe RGB 1998. Then when you would open this file within your RIP printing software, you'd want to keep those settings consistent. So you would also select Adobe 1998. Within a RIP software, you have different color metrics that let you control color. Generally for textile design, you would utilize a relative color metric. And what a relative color metric is any color that is outside of the achievable color space, it will pull it within gamut to the closest color possible that can be achieved. The other color metric that may be utilized within textile production would be a perceptual color metric. This would be commonly used for images that have digital effects with photography. And what a perceptual color metric does is it takes any color out of the color space and then moves it into with gamut, but keeps the relationship between all the other colors in the image. So these are the different variables that you can adjust within the RIP software. And then from here, you would print out your good colored sample, very simply said. And the other process we see commonly with creating good color is the visual match. There's a lot of print service providers that will print out a Pantone color collection per the different fabrics that they're printing, and they will do a visual match for color. So for an accurate color system, this would require the creation of an ICC profile. And what this does is profiles can be created per each fabric type that you use. This really comes important for big brands or corporations such as Coca-Cola has to achieve a Coca-Cola red, for instance, and they have to achieve this color across multiple medias or fabric types. So the way this is done, this is very a simple version and model here, but you would start off with your profiling software. Mimaki provides a TX-Link 4 RIP software, which you can profile within that, or you could utilize a profiling software such as Mimaki's Profile Master. So you would go from here. It will instruct you to print out different color charts that then you would measure with your spectrometer, and you would create a color profile. From here, you would move, once the profile is created, you would then print, it will print an accurate color sample onto the textile. And like I said, this is just a basic overview of this process. We could do a whole nother webinar just on color profiling. So to touch on some, really cool key features for color development, the TX-Link software allows you to load in measured color palettes, such as Anna has created all various color palettes. You could load these and save these within the software, and you could create multiple colorways of the same design without going back to the design CAD software. So for textile design workflows, this is a real increase in the speed of production. Second feature is you can utilize separate data and compile those files within the RIP software. So if you're transitioning from analog printing to digital printing, this is a really smooth transition. It allows you to use your other flattened color separated files, and you can change those colors seamlessly. You can measure the color directly in from a spectrometer or select from one of your swatches. And then it will simply layer the file and create that digital image for you. So these are some digital innovations and highlights and promotions. The two machines that we're featuring here are the best machines for brands or companies looking to move between their sample strike-off production and then to small to medium production printing. So the TS100-1600 was a newly released machine. It got released about a week and a half ago. It's a sublimation printer, so it primarily prints on polyester textiles. It has the capability to do high-speed printing, and it is entry-level model at a high quality. And it's the only machine that is at this price point, at this speed, and of this quality in the market. So it's a game changer. So it's definitely an option for somebody looking to enter this market. And if you see the printer on the right side, that's the TX300 Mark II. This is the world's first printer that's able to print direct to fabric with pigment inks. And then you can print dye sublimation inks onto dye sublimation paper. The machine does this by facilitating a dual ink set. And it's the only printer like this in the market, but this allows you to print every type of textile as the natural fibers, cotton, linen, hemp, bamboo, rayon, protein fibers, silk, and then with the pigment inks, and then polyesters with the sublimation inks. So this really gives you that great versatility for the sample production. It also is able to do single ink configurations with acid, reactive, direct disperse, and pigment inks. Some of those other ink configuration options give you expanded color sets of like 7 color and 8 color. How I mentioned before, you can expand that color space that you can achieve. So it really depends what's the most important features for your business. These are not the only printers we have. Mimaki has a full portfolio of higher production machines. We also have, a higher medium to high production machine. It's a TS55 sublimation printer, which would allow you to do production speeds up to like 699 square feet per hour. And then we also have, our industrial textile printing machines, which you're looking at, 270 linear yards per hour. And for these models, we have a Tiger machine, which also can do sublimation, but it also has direct to fabric printing with reactive inks. So this is going to be for your more bigger manufacturers, your textile mills looking to bring that kind of production in-house. So these are some additional resources from our guest speakers. And this presentation will be loaded on YouTube. And if you would like a copy of it, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to hand the mic over to Betsy to share more information about the Preface Experience Kit.
Oh, thanks, Victoria. Yes, if you're not familiar with Preface, please check out our website for additional events. Tomorrow is actually our Female Founders Forum virtual event, and we are also going to have several vintage showcases with our partners. Our sustainable webinar was yesterday, but the recording is available on the website. And we still do have some Preface kits available, both our complimentary ones and premiums, and you can order those on our website. And I would like to point out that Mimaki printed and provided all the beautiful masks. Thank you, Victoria, that are in all the boxes, and in the premium boxes, they partnered with us to print the master palettes.
We printed the master palettes and the tote bags with the Mark II printer with pigment inks, and we did the mask with the dye sublimation on polyester. So just to add to the feature.
And I haven't seen any questions come in on the chat. But something that I thought was really interesting we talked about in one of our rehearsals was that a lot of brands are now using digital printing for sampling, and then they're using more traditional techniques for bulk. And I know, Denise, you had a lot of experience with that. I thought that might be interesting to share with everybody.
Absolutely. We would frequently use digital printing technology to see our first round strike-offs and to change color combos in the development phase because the turn times were so much faster. And you know, if the bulk order was large enough, we may convert to a traditional wet printing method. However, a lot of times we found ourselves proceeding to production using the digital printing technology because our run sizes were much more efficient for us and allowed us a much smaller production runs, especially when you're producing something like swim and the cut pieces are so small. It was really counterproductive to be producing 10, 20, 30,000 yards of a print run when you could run 1,500, 2,000 yards using a digital printing technology. It became much more efficient for us.
Just to add to that.
Go ahead.
Oh, just to add to that. So from your experience from the brand perspective, do you see the industry moving to smaller batch production in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, especially now, to your point, with e-commerce becoming such an integral part of business nowadays, the speed to market is so much faster with technology like digital printing. And, you know, the opportunities to change color palettes season to season, you know, if you have a print that's a winner and is going to sell both maybe spring to summer, you can quickly change your colors to reflect the season a lot faster with digital technology.
I think that's a good lead into the next question. We have a question for Anna from Olivia. Are there colors or color combinations that you find yourself always gravitating to, or do your preferences evolve with trends and time?
Yeah, that is a good question. It's an interesting question because I know that I gravitate towards warmer colours. I have a fondness for pinks and reds, a personal fondness. And I know from over 25 years of working with colour and with design teams that most people do gravitate towards one thing or another, and that colour is so very personal. But in my role, I have to also step outside of my own needs and desires, and I have to think about what are the brand needs and desires of the client that I'm working with. When I'm putting together Luminary, there is a naturally feminine slant to the book. I find that that's my own sort of style, if you like, and I have a affinity with quite strong colours as well. And Luminary has become quite well known for having a really good balance of colours in the book. So I am drawn to quite strong colours, but I always try to underpin them with what I call the foundation colours, which my brands all need, and they all need updating on their foundations every season. Yeah, it's a long answer to a question. I mean, yeah.
I didn't see any other questions come in, but I know I was really curious, Anna, when you were talking about your treasures that you have for color inspiration, and some you were saying you use to kind of understand what it might look on a shiny base, or maybe something more matte. And I know you do your own work to turn those into color standards. And this is kind of a dual question for Denise too, because I know that sometimes designers will be inspired by something that is shiny or matte or have a certain texture. How do you then translate that into a standard that can be communicated?
So I work with a dye house in the UK, and they're a technical dye company. And we are very old-fashioned in that we send lab dips backward and forward to each other. But if I send him something quite tricky, then he might produce more than 2 or 3 sort of lab dips around that colour. I feel that we've had a 10-year relationship of creating colours together, and he really understands what I like and what I'm trying to achieve on the whole. But this is how Luminary works really well for designers, because what I do in my books is I photograph the original, the raw ingredient of where my inspiration came from. Maybe it's a feather, maybe it's a little pot of powder or a button or some fabric that I found. Alongside that, you will get the absolute technical fabric dyed swatch, which has spectral data attached to it. And then alongside that, you'll get the paper printed color, which I develop with my factory. So it gives the designer all the tools they need. You've got the actual flat color standard to do the technical color matching with, but you've also got the inspirational image of the material or the surface. And for me, that's a sort of a system, if you like, that I developed over the years of how to communicate color and how colors look on different surfaces within my books. And I've found that it's become a way of communicating that now brands like the Dualit project, which I presented, they want to use this system of communicating and telling the story. It tells the story of color. And really that's what I'm all about. I'm about the story of color from imagination and inspiration to design standard, and then almost back the other way again. Then how do you make the standard into the product, into the material that you want it to be as a brand designer? So it's like the story all the way through the process.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty common challenge. Denise and Ken, have you had to deal with that as well? Sort of translate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and to Anna's point, your relationship with your design team or your production base is an integral part of that, and making sure that what you're producing is reflective of what your designer or your concept team is, the message they're trying to deliver. And using technology like spectrophotometers can help sort of eliminate that surface appearance sometimes, because sometimes a high shine fabric can give you a false representation of lightness or brightness. And spectrophotometers can kind of help eliminate that. Or to Anna's point, you could do the multiple iterations of physical submissions. You could do multiple iterations of digital submissions and show that variation of color from light to dark to see, or brightness, to help illustrate that surface shine on your inspiration.
And Ken, to you, are there any special tools that the spectrophotometer would be able to have to deal with maybe different substrate bases with shine?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that designers face, and when they use services like Luminary, I think it helps to alleviate some of those problems, is this expectation that this inspiration thing that I have, whether it be the button or the feather, can be matched on any material. So getting the message across that those inspirations need to be translated into real textile materials that have been dyed or printed is the first key step. But then beyond that, once the supplier has received either the physical standard or the digital data, there's still the opportunity they have to help the designer, their customer, understand the limitations they may face on a particular material, for example. So let's say that they've received a cotton standard and they're trying to match that color on polyester or whatever that may be, and they're having a difficult time. Sometimes they get caught in the trap of sending physical samples back and forth when there's nothing more they can do. I mean, everyone has faced the best can do situation. What we'd like to do is to know early on in the process, not 2 months later, is this the color that I can actually match? And those tools already exist in the supply chain. In the formulation software that these suppliers are using, they can predict ahead of time exactly how closely can they match that inspiration color. And if they cannot match it, they have the opportunity to send what they can in digital form, so that the designer can review that, especially on a color calibrated monitor, and say, okay, I see this is going to be dull and a little bit too blue. Is that going to be okay or not? And they can make those types of decisions at the very beginning of the process rather than 2 months later when they've run out of time. So those tools already exist in the supply chain. It's just a matter of leveraging those technologies and moving forward. And it's sometimes it's a challenge, but those tools are there.
Excellent. Well, I don't know if we have Victoria back. She texted me that her computer isn't working anymore. So I don't see any more questions here. And I wanted to thank everyone again. I think that this journey from the color concept and creation all the way through to the way we can achieve it in bulk production is really helpful for a lot of people. So I want to thank all of you for sharing that today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
For organizing it for us.
Thank you. Thanks for including me.
Thank you.
Bye.